Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And the most important updates are coming from Moscow, from Ukraine, from the relations between these two countries. Let's start from Russia. According to information we have, Putin and the Minister and Russian authorities decided to establish the staffing level of the armed forces of the Russian Federation at more than 2,200,000, including more than 1,300,000 of military personnel. So basically the Russians are going to increase the number of forces for another 170,000 units. The Russians are saying that the main reason of this the increase is the NATO countries and the NATO development to the east. Another important update is coming from Ukraine. To be more precise, the Western press reporter Seymour Hersh this night reported that there are negotiation process between the head of Russian army Valery Gerasimov, the head of general staff, and the head of Ukrainian army Valery Zaluzhny. And these people, these two generals, commanders, have negotiations, peace negotiations about the current situation. According to Seymour Hersh, either the Russians and the Ukrainians are about to agree to stabilize the front line, to freeze the conflict. The Ukrainians will sign the capitulation. Basically, they will give the Russians Donbass, they will give DPR, LPR, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea. The Russians, according to this negotiating process, will allow the Ukrainians to join NATO, but with the obligations not to establish and redeploy the military forces, NATO bases, and attack forces on the territory of Ukraine. So what about, if you ask my opinion, I would say that I believe that this is a fake information. I'll explain to you why. First of all, don't forget that during the previous weeks we got a lot of updates from Zelensky, from the Ukrainian president, about the conflict between Zaluzhny and Zelensky. And the main reason of conflict is that the Ukrainian armed forces believe to Zaluzhny, but they don't believe and they don't trust Zelensky. And Zelensky understands that he must have the president election the next year, but he can't start them right now because he understands that there are very high chances that Zaluzhny can win the elections and can become the next president. And Zelensky, of course, it's not that Zelensky wants. So that's why during the previous weeks, Zelensky was focused and aimed on one thing: to ruin and to destroy the reputation of Zaluzhny. We remember lots of conflicts, lots of scandals, and so on. Even yesterday, we discussed the situation with the building of fortifications along the entire Ukraine. And if you remember, Zelensky, for those purposes, he visited Kherson, Zaporozhye, he visited Kupiansk. He was running all over the combat line, talking with officers and generals, trying to increase his reputation. And after he talked with every single one, Zelensky returned to Kiev and took a decision to build fortifications. And he took a decision to save the personnel and to start withdrawing positions towards more reliable one. So in face of a normal soldier, now Zelensky is the person who tried to save his life. And Zaluzhny is the guy who doesn't have plan for 2024. And now we see an update that came from the West, and to be more pay attention, from the Western journalists, that Zaluzhny has negotiations with the Russians. Don't forget that the power and the real military power in this country belongs not to Zaluzhny, belongs not to Zelensky. The real military power in Ukraine belongs to separate group of neo-Nazi forces, of national battalions like Azov, like many other, those who are currently play the roles of anti-retreat forces, and they can do whatever they like. And if they accumulate and concentrate critical mass, they can make a military coup with Zaluzhny, with Zelensky. They don't care. The only thing they need is to fight with Russia. And if there is an update and some talks about any negotiation process, they will remove Zaluzhny immediately. Another important thing, that piece of news was provided not by, I don't know, somebody who is not like known by anybody, like Yellow Press or something like this. That piece of information was provided by Seymour Hersh, the Western journalist. I'm not saying whether this source is reliable or not. It's up to you. Maybe you know him better. I don't know him much to make these conclusions about his reliability. But the only thing I must say that he's very famous. He have a lot of subscribers. He's an influencer, and obviously the Ukrainians should have started already. Maybe they have already started criminal investigation about this case. And it is very interesting to follow this situation today, because according to my understanding, if I was Zelensky, obviously I would start immediately the criminal investigation against Zaluzhny regarding this negotiation process. So we'll see what Zelensky is going to do, and I believe that the story is going to develop, and we're going to have more and very interesting scenes and footages and many different pieces of information upcoming days. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. Let's start from Novomikhailivka. According to information we have, the Russians continue bombardments of the city. The Russians were bombing this territory. The Russians were attacking and trying to reduce to ruins the edge positions of the village. Currently the Russians still haven't launched any offensive operation in this direction, so probably the Russians are waiting the end of the story that currently are taking place in Marinka, because Marinka, according to some sources, was captured completely by the Russians. Some sources are saying that, at least the Ukrainians are saying, that they still control the west northern part of this village. We are talking about this territory. There are, or at least this area, still in the gray zone that Ukrainians can use, for example, for deployment of forces, for evacuations and so on. But even if the Russians manage to establish complete control over Marinka, we understand that this is not enough for the Russians, for at least to redeploy some forces even from this area to other directions. When talking about securing of this territory, clearing of this territory, obviously we understand that the Russians, if they want to feel themselves secure, if they want to complete the final, to establish final complete of the battle for Marinka, first of all they need to establish control at least over this territory. If they can do this, then we can start talking about like the end of the battle for Marinka. Before this foothold, before taking control over this white cloud, the Ukrainians still save the possibilities to counterattack and to return even half of the village. So currently the Russians, if they want to sleep well, and if they want to redeploy forces, let's say from Marinka, and to change focus from Marinka to Pobeda and Novomikhailivka to the south, they need to continue movements to the west and to create a barrier or secure zone that and the border of this secure zone should lay on the road between Grigorovka and Marinka. So this is the road, and this is like something like a barrier. And what I'm talking about barrier, I'm saying about the distance. So there is a distance like maybe a few hundred meters that is very good for the Russian snipers, artillery, FPV drones to kill everyone who will try to cross this barrier. And then the Russians will be able to change their focus. But of course, if the Russians are able to establish control over this white cloud and to force the Ukraine to step back further in the direction of Georgievka, this will open the Russian gates to continue clearing an offensive operation to the north and to return or establish control over complete territory that located on the south of Krasnogorovka, because it's like a part of the same foothold, it's the part of the same operation, and the Russians also will be able to take control of this territory again. I'm not saying that these two operations and these two footholds is like a matter of 1 or 2 days. Obviously it's months, maybe 2 or 3 months the Russians need. It depends on the level of number of forces the Russians are planning to involve, but at least when I see the map, I see this picture. The Russians will secure the western part of Marinka, and by securing they will be able to collapse the Ukrainian defense among the fields between Marinka, Grigorovka and Krasnogorovka. So this is my understanding of the next plans. And after that, the Russians will change their focus. They will concentrate more forces to the south, and they will start moving to Pobeda and Paraskovievka, Krasnogorovka, Konstantinovka in this direction. Now we are moving to the northern part, to Avdiivka area. We also got a lot of very interesting updates. We don't have a lot of geolocations, but we have a lot of reports. For example, the military expert Ribber published his own analysis regarding the situation, and he shows and he tells that the Russians have progressed at least at 3 directions. According to him, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt in the vicinity of Paraskovievka, Pervomaiska, and as a result of that attack, the Russians established control at least over this territory. Let's add this territory on map. So this is according to the Ribber, the current progress of the Russian forces in this area. And the main reason of these attacks, of these developments, first of all, the Russians are trying to bypass Severnaya Antonienka from the west by moving in this direction. So this is the first plans of the Russians. And the second, and probably from my understanding the main reason of the Russian movements further to the west is to get as close as possible to the road between Yasnobrodovka and Nitailova and to establish fire control over this territory. If the Russians can do this, they will cut another supply road that Ukrainians used to support Avdiivka from, let's say, Kurakhova, Marinka. So the Kurakhova is a railway station, and they're using these roads to support also the Ukrainians in Avdiivka. So to cut this area is the primary target for the Russians. And the second, of course, attempt or the goal of the Russian progress is to cut Pervomaiska in at least a few parts and to collapse and to capture the southeastern part of this village. According to other sources, the Russians also managed to improve their positions between Severnaya, Avdiivka, Vodyana, Opytna in this triangle. And according to Rybar, the Russians managed to establish control at least over this territory in this area. So as you can see, the progress also very significant, and the Russians are getting closer and closer to the Ukrainian positions. And when talking about these movements, the Russians have also few goals, as the same situation as with western flank of Severnaya, to bypass Severnaya from the east and to cut the main supply road. It goes from Chimik block to Severnaya. This is the Chimik block and this is Severnaya. To cut this road, and then the Russians will be able to start the ground operation in the village. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to get as close as possible to Avdiivka to force the 53rd Mechanized Brigade to leave their positions. The Russians are using RBK 500 in this area massively, and the last goal, the most important probably, by getting closer to Avdiivka, the Russians are trying to establish control over this road as well, and this will allow the Russians to start the storming operation in direction of the ex-air defense base in this area, which is still under control of Ukrainian forces. Now we are moving to the northern direction. The Russians are saying that they managed to improve some positions in Stepovo without any showing us. The Ukrainians published from their side the videos of counterattacks. On this video we can see the Ukrainian soldiers who were lying along the wall and who were counterattacking the Russian forces, and there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians were trying to shoot down the Russian FPV drone. Very difficult to understand whether they managed to do this or not. But according to information we have, the Russians also have some progress in direction of Novokalinovo, and as a result of clashes, the Russians establish control over this territory as well. Currently, very difficult to understand what are the main goals and plans of the Russian by attacking Novokalinovo. Probably there are some goals to cut supply roads and so on, but there is still a lot of job to do. Maybe the Russians are just trying to secure the flanks and to get as close as possible. I don't think that the Russians have enough of manpower and forces to attack in many directions and also to stretch their forces by attacking in this chemical plant in Novokalinovo. Maybe they just want to increase the foothold, like to force the Ukrainian artillery systems to go as far as possible from this territory. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation in three directions in Bogdanovka, yet we haven't received even a single geolocated video that the Russians established control over the village or bypassed half of it. So let's wait for today. Maybe today we're gonna get something. And so the Russians continue offensive, but without any confirmed progress. And the Russians continue bombardment of the Ukrainian forces in Ivanovska, in the villages, and so on. Also, interesting updates are coming from Tarskoye salient. According to unconfirmed information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit on Tarskoye salient and to get as close as possible to the Zhiribets river, to this area. So we'll see, because we haven't received confirmation as well. And when talking about Kupiansk, we haven't received anything, just the only video, and I'm talking about the 60 days of Uday diary. Today, this FPV drone operator published another video, the 16th day of bombardments with FPV drone. I'll remind you that the 15th day ended with the casualties among the Ukrainians on the level of 105 soldiers, and by the end of the 16th day, according to information we have, this Uday FPV operator managed to reduce the Ukrainian army for 113 soldiers. So basically he managed to wound and kill up to 8 soldiers per one day. So one more time, we are following this operator with one purpose: to analyze and to understand the effectiveness of usage of FPV drone operators, and to understand how long, first of all, he can survive, because obviously the Ukrainians have already started hunting for him. And the second thing, we need to understand whether it's true or not that one soldier can, in a month or two, to reduce the entire battalion or something like this. And that's it for this short video. Military Summer channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.